Geez, I'm blowing up all of a sudden.
Hey, good afternoon, welcome. I'm not gonna sing for you. Welcome, this is the Marion City Council meeting for Tuesday, December 6th. Thank you for joining us. Just a housekeeping item, because of the acoustics in this room, if anyone is speaking, addressing the council at the microphone, please be mindful to be close to the mic and speak clearly. Okay. First item on the agenda, it's marked by the staff as a presentation of funds to Eastern Iowa honor flights.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. For the last 5 years, the City of Marion has partnered with the Chamber and the Uptown Marion Main Street District to give residents and businesses the opportunity to sponsor and honor veterans on our flagpole banners. These banners honor active duty and past service members. And for $150 sponsorship, the banners are created and displayed for 2 years from Memorial Day to Veterans Day. And this fee includes a $50 contribution per banner to a local veteran. In 2019, a donation was made to the American Legion Post 298 to support local veterans in need of assistance. Today, we are excited to present a check to Eastern Iowa Honor Flight in the amount of $8,550, which accumulated over the last 3 years to support a future honor flight with Metro veterans. So we would like to do a photo op with you as council if we could and celebrate this gift.
You know, in front of the screen.
If we-
I mean, because then you have the title and everything else behind it. Oh, never mind.
Don't go further that way.
Could we have?
Get up.
Just lay on the floor. Okay, here we go.
Oh, from here.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, yes.
So we're on all the time, so.
Yeah.
We should side conversations. Okay.
This is the funniest thing ever.
This has been a very wonderful program, and it felt very good to present the check to the American Legion Post the last time we presented funds, and this feels wonderful. Help support the honor flights, which I hear so much about, and it just gets the big review. So I think that Colette has something to share about that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, last year about this time, I had the opportunity to go with my father on an honor flight. And he still speaks about it to this day. I think one of the things that's really cool is that being a veteran, when he came home from the war, right, it was really mixed emotions. And so, 40 years later, when he was getting off that airplane and the thousands of people welcoming him home, really, really a big deal. And so it's a really important organization, and I'm really proud that Marion plays a part in supporting these veterans.
Okay, our next item is a discussion regarding uptown parking.
So everybody's favorite topic,
So there have been two issues that have come up about parking lately that I'd like to address today. The first is a perception issue, and the second is an issue regarding our events and parking. So this right here is a map that we've created for the public. It's on our Facebook page. We did a couple of these related to construction of where they could and couldn't get to the uptown area. But as you can see on here, the street spots and the parking lots are on here. So this is a reason they were in a bunch of different stores during the construction process. So we plan to print more and distribute those. It's a great resource for the businesses when someone comes in and complains that they couldn't find a parking spot. It just shows them where all the hidden spots. So as I mentioned, there's two issues. One is about perception. You are no longer probably going to be able to park right in front of a business that you're going to anymore. You might have to walk a block or two, and that's just the reality of a growing, vibrant city. The second issue is with parking during our events. Our new festival street has been an incredible asset that we've been able to utilize this year, but we have had an issue with cars parking there during events. And as you can see from this event map, there's really not a lot of room to accommodate for cars that are parking spaces that vendors are supposed to be in. So Uptown has included parking as one of our 3 strategies that we will adopt tomorrow morning at our board meeting. And we'll be working a lot on parking this next year and hope to partner on the parking study that may or may not be in the future this next year. But we have come to a few solutions to kick things off on this parking strategy. This is a couple of examples of what we've been working on this past year, and this is just a start. The yellow image is an article that the mayor put together for the Marion Messenger, and we also published it in the Business Connection. Great article that talks about that parking perception, the maps that I discussed, and then we also have windshield flyers that we put on cars occasionally that say, "Love that you're shopping in Uptown." Or they say, "Are you a resident or a business owner or an employee? There's better places to park than where your customers can be." So sometimes we place those on cars that we know maybe you could be parking in a different place instead of where the customers should be. And then what I want to talk about today on the left is, and get some feedback from you, is this Parking and Partners program that we've been working on for a couple of years. So what it is these signs here on the left that would be put in private lots. So these are lots like banks and churches that have a lot of parking spaces in Uptown. They're private and they have regular business hours. So we've gone to larger lots in Uptown and asked if they would be willing to partner on a program like this, and most of them have said yes. So during non-business hours, they would be signed as public parking. It also will come with advice on what to do if someone's parking there that doesn't align with the sign, or maybe it's an abandoned car, and what to do in those cases if someone's using this program. We have quite a few lots that would like to participate in this. We'd like to brand it with our community branding for consistency. And then also sign the public lots with that P-bug over on the top left corner of the sign for parking, and that's what's on our maps and everything. So just keeping that consistency, the public doesn't really notice what's what usually, and they just can kind of see one consistent sign, they'll figure it out. So that is the first one. Does anyone have any questions on that? We're getting to next. Good. All right. So we will move forward with those signs. We're looking at maybe doing some more temporary signage to see how the program goes for the first few months, and then look into getting some more the metal fabricated signage. Those are on back order anyway. So we might be seeing chloroplast signs for now, and then moving towards the consistent metal signs. Okay, the second part of parking is we've had trouble, as I mentioned, that we've had cars parked when it's been signed, no parking for our events. This has been a struggle. About 75% of our farmers markets this last year had 1 or 2 cars parked there that we had to work around and move vendors. We actually had a gap of about 6 vendor stalls that we could have filled with vendors, but weren't able to because we needed that space to accommodate for cars that were parking there. The no parking signs, the new ones are awesome. They've gone a long way in helping with the communication. But as I said, there's still usually 1 to 2 cars parked there. Last Friday for Christmas in the park, past the time that was supposed to be 5 cars parked out there. So we were able to hunt down the owners of those cars and just, we all know everyone that parks uptown, so hunting them down was we were able to do it. But hopefully we can figure out a solution to this. So the current ordinance for towing vehicles does not allow us to tow vehicles for events, just because of the rules. And I will let Lauren talk more about that. And then I'll get into some of the solutions that are on our side of this.
Can I add something, Brooke?
Yep.
Is it on? It's on. Just to add, this is not a new issue with the parking for events because of 7th Avenue. This has been ongoing for multiple years, wherever there have been events, even when like there was a farmer's market, when they were in the parking lot on 8th Avenue and 12th Street. So just wanted to put that out there. That's not a new problem because of the street, the festival street.
Thanks. So the challenge we have is trying to get those cars out before the event starts. If I could do it 24 hours in advance, I could lock the entire street down and get it done, but that doesn't do any good for the businesses the night before. So we've got the bar traffic, we got people that are parking. Again, we don't want to encourage people to drive drunk. We want them to take an Uber if they've had too much to drink uptown, but that inevitably means they've left the car sitting where it's supposed to be. Brooke was right. Under the current policy and the ordinance, what we've been doing is we try to find the owner. We can. I've got a draft of the ordinance that'll change that. I think that as long as we mark it well in advance, I've got no problem with showing up that morning at 5 a.m. We can start towing cars. We just have to put it in the ordinance in our policy to do that. Again, I think you get kind of on shaky ground when you make different rules for different parts of the city. So I don't know if we need to do that all over. That's something I'm still mulling over. The other part with the solution on the private parking, again, there's things in the state code and there's things in our current policies that would require us to wait. If it's an abandoned car, we have to wait 24 hours before we can tow it, even off private property. If it's illegally parked, if it's marked no parking, violators will be towed. Karen and I have talked about that. I think we're good to go on that. We just have to change the ordinance to do that in our internal policies to make that happen. Again, my position on the private property is we shouldn't be involved in that at all. The only involvement we should have is they call us and tell us, Darius calls and says, hey, Farmer State Bank, I'm pulling a car from their lot that was abandoned. It's not theirs. They want it towed. Give me the license number and the VIN. Our dispatchers will run it and make sure it's not stolen or involved in some crime that we need to get involved with. And if not, we'll just keep a spreadsheet as people go to pick their cars up. If they can't find it, they call in to report it stolen. We can go, nope, it was stolen by Darius from Farmer State Bank. So again, it's stuff we're working on. Karen and I have been bouncing emails back and forth all day. I think we've got a solution. It'll just take us a little time to get that verbiage right. And then when we do the ordinance, it's a 3 reading. You guys can waive 2 of them if you want. That's up to you, but we'll get you an ordinance by the next council meeting.
Any questions for Chief?
Just a quick one. So am I correct that the signage that should not be any parking for an event is put up 24 hours in advance?
Yes,
So they've got the entire day. When they park there,
they know.
that signage is there and they can't plead ignorance that they can't read.
Correct. They put, and there's basically a sign at every parking spot up there.
That's
There's
fine.
no way they're not seeing it.
Okay.
So the system that is being proposed, which I think there's a lot of merit to it. Are we going to need to recalibrate it once we have our parking study done and know what solutions that proposes? Or is this really going to be consistent once the parking study is all done?
I don't know how to answer that because I don't know what's going to be in the parking study and what conclusions are going to come of that.
Sorry. I don't know that event parking would be handled differently. I mean, that we're just closing a street to have the event parking, so, or to have the event staged. So I don't know that this would, I mean, we would share with the parking consultant that we're gonna be having, we have event and we use this for event space and factor that into overall availability perhaps, but I don't know that closing the street and the solutions that we're offering here is relevant.
Okay,
And I think if anything, it would be similar to like a snow route.
okay.
Right.
Ordinance for snowy days when Brian's guys can't get through with the plow, we can come in if we need to.
So the good news there is the study, this is an input to the study. The study will give us some information. What I was concerned about is that we would be basically, making the community familiar with this process, and then 2.5 years from now, we're changing it again. So this is good for stability.
Questions? for Brooke? You have anything to add? Brooke?
I will add that so they usually sign them well in advance of 24 hours. Usually it's at least a day, probably more like 2 when they're signed. We have in the past gone out and put little flyers and windshields to also make sure that we actually have different colors for different times when they were placed, so we kind of know when they were there and when they've left. So we've gotten kind of strategic about it in the past. But I would see this, like, let's say we implement a 2-hour parking zone. This would help us if there were any issues with that too.
I think people are getting used to parking situation, and certainly it did deter several thousand people from being down there last Friday night. They still came and enjoyed themselves and found a place to park. So it's just, I think it's a learning curve for the community because they're used to, a certain way of parking and having availability when there was nothing happening in uptown. And now it's just a learning curve of having to, learn how to maneuver through the parking situation with a busy and active uptown. Thank you for all your work on it.
Town will typically have a parking procedure problem.
That's right. That's a good problem to have.
Good problem
You
to
don't want the opposite.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Anything else to add on this? Okay, we'll move on to number 3, leadership in action, 2023 Winter Lights presentation. Welcome. If you could state your name and address and go ahead and make your presentation.
Hi, my name's Harrison March. Address is 4397 Saratoga Drive here in Marion.
My name is Stephanie Gobelai. My address is 5211 Prairie Trail, Marion, Iowa. And I guess I will go ahead and start. So thank you, council and mayor, for allowing us to come up here today. Harrison and I are representing the Marion Leadership and Action Program and the Winter Lights program or presentation. We have just seen kind of what the fundraising did last year of the tree lighting this year. So that was fantastic. And we're here again to ask for your support for this year. And thank you for support for the last 10 years. So.
As Stephanie mentioned, 10 years of Winter Lights kind of made us start to think back, as I think any decade would. You kind of reflect on what the last 10 years have meant for the program and not only the growth that we've seen with Winter Lights, but the growth and change we've seen all across the city of Marion. Here we call it reaching higher, but we see it in expanding past Highway 13 and growing our schools. And what we think we can do with Winter Lights is really highlight some of the areas here in Uptown that have changed over the last decade, really make the space a destination year round, but especially during the holidays. We want to bring Winter Lights into the alleys and into the Artway itself to try to connect what we think are 3 really signature spots in Uptown Marion, that being the park, the plaza, and the Artway. each of those kind of has their own different feel. You've got the park, which is a little bit more of a traditional green space in the heart of the city. You've got the plaza, which is a little bit kind of upscaley and not in like an inaccessible way, but in it's kind of fun and upbeat, different with the bistro lights overhead with the art and the sidewalks. And you've got the Artway, which is sort of like a hidden treasure almost. You sneak off down the alley, you find yourself in this really cool, unique space. And so by hopefully installing these lighted tunnels through the alleyways that run alongside bricks that connect 7th Ave to the Artway, and then alongside Uptown Snug that will connect the plaza to the Artway, we can guide people through these 3 signature spots in Uptown, whether you're a longtime resident and you just want a fun, cool way to get around Uptown and literally be wrapped in these winter lights, or if you're a visitor and you've not really been around the area before, but this can kind of guide you from one fun spot to another during the holidays. We want to bring lights down into the Artway as well. We found what we like in one item, these lighted spheres or orbs, however you want to call them, that we can put inside of the boxes that normally hold plants during the spring and summer and complement some of the colors with these unique colored spheres to really highlight the Artway. We can also identify some customizable objects further down the road when we have a better idea of what's going to be on sale after the holiday season through the vendor. And we want to make sure we give a big thanks to Seth at Parks and Rec for his help in identifying some of these items in this project as well.
So our actual request to you is going to be $20,000 from the hotel motel tax fund budget for the Winter Lights program. And we hope to get that approval this week.
With that, you can see a full estimate of our costs there on the left-hand side. Our class's goal is going to be on that subtotal figure, $35,900, and that those optional costs are if the city were to hire out the services for labor, lift, and storage. Those would be on an annual basis. And again, I don't mean to throw everything at Seth, but he's our expert for some of these questions, so we may loop him in as well. If you have some questions about the project or costs or anything, we're happy to address those.
Thank you. Good presentation. Anyone have questions?
Just a quick question. Can we be reminded of how much we've given over the last couple of years annually through this program? And then if I understand, based on what you've given us here, is if you move forward with it, the goal for the class is to get 35.9, but then the city would still need to come up with that additional $14,000 for the setup and tear down, in addition to the $20,000 potentially that you're asking for. So those are my 2 questions.
So last year, we 30,000 was given from hotel motel from the city to help fund for the tree. In the past, we've always budgeted for typically that 20,000 range, and that's what it's currently budgeted for. And then wanted to throw up the numbers for the setup and tear down. One just as an option as we start looking at the activity up there, more time if we may be able to do a lot of these things, but if it comes to that's also takes more time for us to put it up. So I just wanted to throw those options up there for council to look at as potential options instead of as an avenue to be able to become more efficient at putting things up there. So just want to throw those out there, but depending on next year on the Central Plaza project, we should be able to take this on depending on how much we do. And as far as the customizable things that we've been talking about, we're working with a vendor to identify those customizable things, what we can specifically do within the Artway. And so tunnels and the light spirit were conversation pieces that were favored from the chamber in the Marion Leadership and Action class. But we're also looking at other spaces within an area of things that can be done customizable to help enhance it, make it a lively because right now it's just used as a to and fro place, not really activated as far as use.
Other questions?
Not a question, but a comment. Again, my wife and I were uptown Friday and fantastic event, by the way. But again, one of the comments we made is it's starting to look, Marion Uptown is starting to look like a real destination place in the winter with all this lighting. Because one of the comments we made is when the kids were younger, we used to take them over to Wyoming. Because the main street in Wyoming, even though it was a small town, had it entirely lit up and it was a really neat place. So I think we need to continue to grow this. I'd love to see it lit up completely from roundabout to roundabout. Maybe that's aggressive. But again, when you talk about how you want to show your city, to me, this is a really neat thing to do and really important.
I agree. Personally, I don't think there's a better direct connection between the purpose of hotel motel taxes and a project, because I mean, this is directly related to attracting people to the community and visitors and shoppers. So I think it's what hotel motel is supposed to be for. So I think it's a great use of those funds.
Curious about the lighting with the pictures up there. They're not holiday festive lights. I assume we would order, or they can be Christmas colors, I would assume.
Oh, yeah, no, when we talked about it, some of the things we were talking about, kind of with how we kind of labeled the artway is, there's it's business up front, kind of party in the back, keeping with kind of the bright colors in the artway
So-
idea. But yeah, no, everything would be kind of customizable as far as what colors are wanted out there. And much
That's what I
similar to
want.
what we put into the roundabout, that can be, they have every single color you could probably imagine.
Gotcha.
Into those that range from sizes of 6 inches to 3 feet. So,
And you can program them to whatever color you want, right?
probably be,
Oh.
they won't be, there'll be LEDs, but has to be stationed as one color, I guess. So they won't be able to just change colors.
Okay.
Out of that.
Thanks.
So this request, this $20,000 would be expended then next year to procure the lights and get them in place for a year from now? Is that the game plan?
Yes, yeah. So it'd be next calendar year, but this fiscal year.
Right. So I guess the question that I have is, I would expect that here in the post-holiday season, the 50-foot tunnel, the lighted spears and other decorations are probably going to be on sale.
You would think, with working with this vendor, we get pretty heavily discounted, so they're already giving us the prices for those discounted rates.
So without showing necessarily my overwhelming favoritism towards this, because I'm sitting next to Councilmember Jensen, he wants to do from end to end in town. It doesn't make sense to try to buy more of the lighting appliances sooner rather than later in order to optimize what we're ultimately getting done. And perhaps then at a later date, free up the hotel motel monies for different allocations. So I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to move faster versus slower.
The only reason we're kind of waiting towards the holidays, just because the vendor that we're currently working with right now is pretty, obviously the lights are going on everywhere. So we want to work with them as far as trying to do some customizable things. And until after the holiday, they won't be available to help with that.
I think what I was suggesting is that we slightly increase the allocation
Oh,
and get a better pricing on more equipment at whatever point in time we buy.
yes, okay, gotcha.
Two quick things, maybe three. I guess the first thing is right, I'm in agreement with my team here. How exciting to continue to get more and more lights in the uptown. Second comment is I appreciate Will's perspective on Christmas lights and the colors. I also think it's important to acknowledge that not everybody is a Christian, and so we want to think about that as we light up our city and make it as welcoming as we can. And then third, just to make sure I understand, so the $20,000 has been budgeted through hotel motel, which is great. And the additional 15, I don't know, my math is bad, whatever, $20,000 it is for the setup. That hasn't been budgeted yet. Do we have an idea where we would pull that from for the setup and tear down?
So those optional figures are just, wanted to show council those options because there's been questions, where are we gonna store all these or things like that. So, I just wanted to bring those tables out or those numbers out there because those been questions in the past. And so that now council can see those kind of figures. So if we go to future planning, instead of having to allocate space or to create, a shed or something like that, those numbers are there to help educate and get that data out. The difference between the subtotal and the hotel motel is going to be in the leadership and actions responsibilities to raise those funds to make up the difference. But as far as the labor lifting right now, it's all the lights are being put up with parks and public services there, but those, if that was an option to be able to contract out, that's something we could certainly look into as far as budgeting.
One more question. One of the comments I've had with a number of people, and I would also support that as too, is I think a lot of people would love to see that 30-foot tree continue to grow taller. So my question is, so I can answer other people's questions, is what is the estimated cost? I'm assuming it goes up in 5-foot increments. So what is the estimated cost for each additional incremental piece that could be put on there?
That's a good question. So they go in 4-foot increments. And I don't have those numbers with me, but I can certainly provide those for Thursday or to everyone. But they go in 4-foot increments and it can go up to possibly 70 feet. And there is also a base, like a drum base too. So you don't have to have greenery from all the way to the ground. So you can kind of have some decorations on the base to kind of lighten it up. But yes, that was the intention with the panel trees is the options to be able to reach higher.
Yeah, I won't push for 70-foot, but I would love to see 50. Anyway, we want to see that from a long ways away.
Airplanes.
There's the other side of Cedar Rapids.
The other thing that we could consider in the future is also expanding like down 11th Street, up 10th Street, outside of that.
Yeah,
Because that's a major entry point to the city, is 11th Street.
Well, and I foresee, as we continue to work on 7th Avenue, going from roundabout to roundabout, making those infrastructure improvements that we would probably continue those with along the poles, things of that
Yeah, on the
nature.
poles.
And there's opportunity too to expand winter lights to like parks like La Park or Thomas and create kind of a drive-through park show or light show too. So there's other areas to explore when it comes to the holiday lights. That doesn't just have to then create Marion as just a whole destination.
Couple things. First, Grant, I guess the mayor brought it up too. Are you suggesting that a holiday light master plan be put together?
No, but that's a nice add-on.
Curious on your fundraising. How have you done so far with your fundraising for the
15.9. Yeah, out of that 15.9, we have an awesome head start. The first Oktoberfest in Uptown raised about $10,000. The chamber has said they can put toward that 15.9 figure for us and hopefully continue that down the road for future MLIA classes. Past that, we've had 2 events so far. We did a guest bartending night at Uptown Snug, and then we had a spot up Friday for the lighting of the peace tree. We've raised about $100,000 for the first 2 events. So
excellent?
that puts us at about 5,000 more to go with some donor outreach to do and more events planned for the next few months.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We would love your donation.
Well, that was going to be my final comment is that when the fundraising begins, we all have the opportunity to help them. If we know people or companies or businesses or individuals who would be willing donors, we could help them by reaching out to those people and helping to increase the impact with more donations. Thank you for taking on this effort. We really appreciate it. It's really making a big impact. I also want to thank staff in this department and public service for all their work in putting up the lights every year. Seth was here about 2 weeks when I approached him and said, hey, we've got to do something better about holiday lights. He said, I have a plan. And look at that. I mean, it's really come a long ways in the last couple of years. So thanks to everyone who's had a hand in it. Okay, anything else? Okay, so no items are marked on pages 2 and 3. Are there any particular items that need discussion on pages 2 and 3? Okay, we'll move on to page 4. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was trying to find what page this was on when I looked earlier. So just as a side note on A5, Ryan. Authorizing that payment, and I know in the scheme of things, this is our membership dues, but we've seen presentations from most of the organization in which we interact, especially as donors. Is there a plan to bring them in to do like an overview of what our membership situation is with them?
Yeah, I can talk because this base is close to me. The answer is yes. I actually have mentioned it to Doug Newman that that's something that we want to start incorporating with them. And it's not just with the Economic Alliance, but it's also with like Cedar Rapids when we talk about the sewer, or you saw a couple meetings ago with Brad DeBrouwer from the transit. So that is something that we are starting to work with our partners on and try to get them slated. Haven't had a conversation yet, but I am going to be at an Economic Alliance event on Thursday. I hope to run into Doug and continue to push that conversation.
Very good. Okay. Then on page 4, item C2 is not marked. Any questions on that? Otherwise, move on to C3. Chief?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Wanted to provide an update tonight about fire protection plan reviews and also a request to supplement funding following an emergency purchase we made in late October. And so the plan review process for fire protection systems as a part of development is something that the department has fallen behind on, and then a staffing vacancy that's been extended out over a period of time in our prevention bureau has compounded that challenge for delayed permitting. And so what we've done to take action to resolve this delay is to outsource this task to be completed. And actually that outsourcing is providing a really high value at a turnaround time of 10 days to get that plan review completed. And so what we're looking for the rest of this budget year, as we are trying to make sure that we're providing a quality service to get these reviews completed, is an additional $50,000 to get that outsourcing and that process stabilized, to make sure that we're supporting development to get those plan reviews completed. Over the next several months, as we enter into the next budget year, we look to enhance this process more comprehensively with our internal partners to make the machine of essentially overarching and work more effectively. We also have preliminary plans to, instead of having these fees within the operating budget or being subsidized, to be included as a part of the development costs. And so that's still being reviewed and considered, but those are things that we're discussing in order to continue to provide a good turnaround time and quality review for the community in regards to development. Two quick things as a part of this. We've already had one touch point meeting with the chamber and our internal partners to kind of bounce this off of them to get their thoughts on it. And so as we move into the next several months, we want to have engagements with the community, the development groups within the community to provide some education on what we're looking to do to where they would have awareness of this. And then also to where we can build the system to run more effectively internally, not only just with the fire department, but how we integrate into the other systems for development.
Any questions for Chief? Go ahead.
Not a question, just just an information point for the council. We did run this through the council subcommittee before we got to this point. So we kind of laid out background that you're hearing today. So we did have that touch point as well.
Well, Chief, I expressed previously, I'm in favor of this, and one of the things that you mentioned is it's providing high quality service, high quality review on a timely basis so that developments can proceed on schedule. Yeah, I think that's an obligation that we have to our developer partners, but I think of it more as this being done well on a timely basis provides fundamental safety infrastructure in any building that's going in. And so, and that's long lasting, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So I think we really are at a point, this is a prudent action to take in my view.
Okay, so this is not a currently budgeted item.
Correct, it is not currently budgeted. We did include as a part of the budget packet, the fee schedule. And it's based on square footage. And so you can see what those costs are based on the plan review and the size of the development.
Anyone else? All right, the remainder of page 4 and on page 5 through F4. Those items that require discussion. Questions on those? All right, then we are at F5 on page 5 and have.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So today I would like to discuss and provide a little bit more information on what F5 is. So this is setting the public hearing for December 22nd to discuss the applications for the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds, which are specific housing funds. And so this is all of them. Okay, sorry. Yes. Well, gonna say, what we know is that Maxfield Research, we've seen the presentation from them noting that we do need housing in the next 8 years, 7 years in all aspects, right? So we saw the higher end, the beginner housing, rental housing, senior housing, all of that was covered. And so with these Community Development Block Grant funds, I was going to have Paula Mitchell with ECOG explain a little bit more about that program that we have the opportunity to apply for these funds.
Welcome.
Thank you. Paula Mitchell with East Central Iowa Council of Governments. And as noted, the reason why we're here is that some funding has become available for derecho recovery. And this is Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery funding that was appropriated by Congress and allocated by U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, who determined that Lynn County was the most impacted area in Iowa. So 80% of this funding will be available only to Lynn County and communities within Lynn County. So it is an opportunity. The funds are intended specifically to replace housing that may have been damaged or lost as a result of the derecho. And units will be required to meet certain standards, which include being more resilient to future disaster events, green build, things like that. Applications are due to the state no later than December 30th of 2022. And some of the parameters of this program all are required to have some affordability restrictions. 51% of all of the rental units need to be affordable to households at or below 80% of the AMI, which is adjusted for household size, but you can see on the slide the median for the area. And all of the owner occupied units will also need to be affordable. Funding that's available is up to 100,000 per unit for sale units and 75,000 per unit for rental units. There's also some funding available for infrastructure and for mitigation to enhance those resilient features. The affordability period is 15 years for those for sale units and 15 to 20 for rental, depending on how many units in the project. So that's a high level overview. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I can't remember from the past presentation, are these single family homes only or are multifamily units qualified? These are all multifamily?
No, I was gonna touch base, once we did the overview of the program, I was gonna touch base on the projects individually.
Oh, okay.
Are there any questions about the program itself?
No.
No? Okay, I'll go back to the slide that I briefly skipped over. And so what we have is we have,
Well, I do have a question.
yes,
Is there a limitation on where these projects can go? Is there only certain areas where they can be placed?
As long as they are within Lynn County, they're eligible. The state is looking for projects that exhibit smart growth principles and that are consistent with the community's zoning, however.
But there's no requirement as far as like accessibility to other services or anything like that.
It's not a baseline criteria, but they will be ranked based on that criteria. So
Okay.
proximity to services and amenities, transportation.
I had heard something about that, so I just wanted to clarify for everyone. So, okay, thank you. Go ahead, Kesha.
okay. And so on the aerial that we have on the screen before you is, number one is Abode. Construction is part of their current development, the Ridge Indian Creek. So those would be duplex units. So these would be the owner occupied units. And so there's 20 structures in there. And then Capstone project number 2, so all the yellow dots, right? So if you can see the numbers, so Capstone is kind of center of the screen. This is off Indian Creek Road. So tucked in with Winslow House. It is anticipated to be senior apartments. So on the same property as the Winslow House. So this would be independent living for seniors on the Winslow House property. Number 3 is the Hatch project. And so this is, it's the red dot, bottom center of this screen. And so that is at the southwest corner of 6th Avenue and 15th Street. And so that is a 3-story multifamily rental. So Abode is the only owner occupied application we have received. Everything else is rental anticipated. So the Hatch property is anticipated to be full multifamily residential. Number 4 and number 5 are the 2 close dots on the screen that are the Beachmint property. So those are addition of a detached accessory dwelling unit proposed. And so it's a single family lot that has 1 or 2 units existing, and then they would propose an additional unit, so detached accessory dwelling unit. So the unit above the garage. So it's a 3-stall garage, and then it's a residential unit above. So those are multifamily, but on a much smaller scale. So they're just, it's one additional unit per lot. There's 2 lots proposed in that. Number 6, high development. So this is where the Methodist Church is currently. And so this is incorporating multifamily residential units. So I believe it's 20 units in that property. Within the church itself. This isn't part of the newer development that they have talked about on the property, on the east side of their property. So it's just the church itself. And then the Rinderneck property is at the northeast corner of 8th Avenue and 10th Street. So this is the ESCO parking lot, as some may refer to it, the parking lot north of North Eighth Avenue, east of 10th Street. And so that would again be a 3-story multifamily residential property. So that's the public hearing is to set the date for that. And so where we go from here, right? So we've received the applications. Paula is still reaching out to some of the applicants if something is missing. There is a plethora of documents required to be in there. So Thursday would be setting the date for the public hearing. So we are reviewing, would plan to present those to the council at the public hearing. And then these would require letters of support to go on to be applied at the state. Questions?
So that's all that's required from the city is a letter of support.
It's a letter of support, and there are some documents that go along with the application submittal, and that would all be provided to you in your packet prior to action on that item.
I'll just add a couple more comments. So we go through a ranking
Can you
process.
speak into the mic?
Oh, sorry. I'm like,
Redirect it.
thank
There you
you. We will go through a ranking process. We're starting that work now, but we are needing more complete applicants. So just to get this process started, they gave us like a preliminary plan. So we'll have, this is what Paula is waiting for. That information is due to them on due to her on the 9th. So that then she can work through that process, and then we'll rank those projects. And that's what we'll bring to you for the public hearing as to what are those top projects and what are those projects that we would support.
Okay, so there'll be a discussion at some point as to what we support.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I'm going in more detail to what the mayor was just asking. Because I feel like this is really high level for a lot of change or a lot of what's happening. Okay, so you're showing us this now. Then they will do a more complete application because you just needed to see basically what's potentially out there. So what is the timeline after this as far as past the 9th, like once that happens, then you rank, and that's my first question. And then maybe I missed this, but potentially how many of those projects would we approve? All of them, some of them, 2 of them, 3 of them? They all receive all of that? Is that a way off base question? Is it, and then is it like we would rank them and then it's like an all or nothing, or how does that work?
That's really the city's decision, so it would be at the council's pleasure, but potentially any or all of those projects could receive funding from the state if they were forwarded. So you have the opportunity to decide which projects you would like to support, and if they're requesting financial support, if you would like to do that. That all becomes part of the application. And just to give you a sense, we do expect that this will be competitive. There's about 16 million available in Lynn County for the for sale housing and about 15.75, something like that, for rental. This pot of money also includes other jurisdictions in Lynn County, so unincorporated areas, Cedar Rapids, other communities, and it's expected to be competitive.
Are they required to have secured the property before they apply?
They're required to demonstrate site control, which could mean ownership and option to purchase some form of site control.
Okay. What else?
I can probably do this too. Once they are built, and it's in perpetuity for it's in perpetuity, like these are built and forever they are in the classification, right? So they're protected. Or like using the CDBG funds, I know it's the loosest of the government funds, but they're still pretty restrictive in the whole grand scheme of things. So what does that look like 20 years from now after if there were however many are built? Like, what does that look like from there? Does that owner have to keep?
For the for sale housing, the affordability term is 15 years and it would be secured by a deed restriction or a forgivable mortgage of some type.
Okay.
We believe the state will provide that document. That's pretty typical. For rental projects, it's 15 years if there are fewer than 5 projects, and 20 years if there are 5 or more units in the project. And again, that would be secured with deed restriction
Okay,
documents.
so they can be
Yep.
protected as that
Yep.
intent for those funds.
Where else? Ryan, you have something?
Yeah, I want to say thank you to the council for your patience on this. The moment the state announced this, if you recall, we had Nick Glue come in and provide a presentation. So we tried to keep this in front and dissect it and understand it as best as we can for as quickly as the state has rolled this out. So we haven't had a lot of flexibility. That's why partnering with ECOG is an important thing for us. Just setting the public hearing, we're going to go through and dive in and provide that analysis for the different sites, and hopefully have as much information for you all to make those decisions. So appreciate the patience, and we're trying to keep up with this as quickly as we can.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add? Thank you. Okay. On the abstention calendar, are there any items that require discussion? So I'll turn it over to Leo for that. Okay, we'll move on to the regular agenda, A1. That's our city attorney.
Good evening. You will be asked on Thursday to approve the first reading of the amended ordinance, Chapter 31, the Civil Rights Commission. And I just wanted to give you a quick summary of those changes. I sent this out to you all a couple weeks ago so you could review it because there are some pretty significant changes. The changes were all made in response to changes in the state code and in our codification process. The state code, I believe it was last year, they passed a law stating that we could no longer protect housing vouchers provided by the government. However, we are still allowed to protect other sources of lawful income, such as veterans benefits, child support, alimony, things like that. So we've made some changes to the code just to make sure that our lawful source of income as a protected class is consistent with what we're allowed to do under the new state code. So that was the biggest changes that we had to make, and we have it until mid-January to get that change approved. We don't really have a choice on that one. So if you have any objections to that, we'll have to take it up with the state legislature. Then there's some other changes that we made that relate to the commission composition, the procedures and powers. And probably the biggest changes, we are changing the number of commissioners. We're reducing it by 2. Part of the reason that we're making that change is because right now we have several openings on the commission already. We're struggling to get applicants and people who are willing to serve on all of our boards and commissions. And really, right now, the size of our commission is out of line with what our comparable cities have. So we took a look at what the comparable cities have. So reducing that by 2 would put us more in line with what cities of our size should have. It will also make it easier for us to get a quorum together when we need to, which leads us into some of the next changes. We did reduce the number of required meetings. The commission does plan to still meet monthly, but right now our code says they have to meet monthly. And if you can't get a quorum together, that can be really difficult to get another meeting scheduled in a calendar month. This gives them the ability to just push things off to the following month if there's not anything major. Obviously, if there's something major, they can reschedule. But with the current vacancy situation with more to come, that's been an increasing challenge that Alicia's had to try and go through trying to schedule those monthly meetings. They are talking about adding some ex officio members or non-voting members. That way they will still have a large number for volunteers, but they don't have to worry about that number then for the quorum. We've also taken out all of the provisions relating to hiring a full-time executive director or other staff members. We simply don't have that in the budget and we don't have the need for it. Right now, we get anywhere from 1 to 3, 3 being on the really high end, but our typical number is 1 or 2 complaints per year. And so we really don't have the need to have an executive director to manage, to manage 2 to 3 complaints per year. There were a lot of provisions relating to that and relating to the complaint investigation process, which we don't do. So we simply took those out of the code. Should we reach a point where we need to process complaints in-house, then that's something we can revisit, and that would need to be part of the budgeting process at that time as well. The other changes that we made were simply updating the language to be more inclusive. We changed all of the he, his to they, thems, she, hers, same thing. We also updated some of the terminology, especially as relates to some of the mental and intellectual and physical disabilities to be more in line with what the common language is now and what's acceptable. Then there were also some references to state and federal codes that have those were referencing the correct portions. This has been reviewed with the commission. We took into account their suggestions when we made the final revisions. They've seen the final version as well, and they were in support of that. This also goes hand in hand with the following item, which is the 28E with the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission. That currently has them doing a lot of extra administrative work, which we are currently handling in-house with Alicia. She's handling the intakes. And so really all we need from them at this point in time is to handle the investigations that we don't refer to the Federal Housing Authority or to the Iowa Civil Rights Association, which would be any of our protected classes that are not recognized by the federal or state government, such as lawful source of income, family status, and there's a couple of other ones that we would refer to them. Are there any questions?
Thanks for all your work. Thanks for all your work. Okay, so the next item that's marked for discussion is F3 on the last page. Items to discuss prior to that item. Okay, we'll move to F3 for Nicole.
So we have design standards in front of us. So council has been waiting for this day, and here we are. Before I kind of dig into some of the details of the proposed code, I'd like to kind of recap some of the background and how we got here. So back in November of 2021, council did direct staff to start looking at community design standards. We did that. We looked at our existing design standards we have in place. Some of them will maintain in place, but we also looked at comparable cities. And then once we had a decent draft compiled, we brought it back as a presentation to council in February of 2022. At that meeting, we went through basic materials that we were going to propose, also with the process ending at the Planning and Zoning Commission. Council directed us to continue moving forward as we had presented. So that is exactly what we did. We took feedback from that council discussion, feedback from the Planning and Zoning Commission discussion we had had. We did present at the Home Builders Association, took their feedback along with some comments we received from local architects. So it's been kind of a long process, a lot of feedback, a lot of discussions, but only what I would consider more so minor tweaks in refinement to what was presented in February. So the Planning and Zoning Commission did review this for 3 months in a row at their meeting. One of the big sticking points was that kind of materialist and not wanting to kind of overreach in what we were asking architects to do. We still wanted to respect the design professional and what they do. So kind of digging into the code, the intent was to create community-wide design standards, minimum ones. And then kind of thinking about that, staff was like, well, with design standards, it's kind of hard to look at just the outside of a building without its relation to kind of that site layout. So we did incorporate more of a formalized site plan review process. We do have an informal one currently when we look at multifamily commercial site plans that don't go to planning, zoning, or go to the council unless if they're in our central corridor zoning districts or part of a planned unit development zoning. Otherwise, it is just an informal process. So with this code, we've got those minimum design standards and kind of formalizing that process for those multifamily and commercial projects that do come forward. Then we also wanted to make sure that what we were proposing is in line with our Marion comprehensive plan. So within that document, it does talk about enhancing the appeal and image of the city through better design and development, and encouraging a unified, high quality design and construction for all development. So what we are proposing, we feel like fits with what that guideline of the comprehensive plan wants us, is guiding us to do. And then we built on existing and former design standards. So for the design standards, we use the Tower Terrace Road C3 zoning ordinance. So with the citywide zoning update, that kind of disappeared, but we did take a look at that as a good starting point. It included lighting standards, some material stuff. So we took a look at that one along with our central corridor zoning district standards and our central corridor overlay district. And that overlay district stretches from 2nd Avenue out to Highway 13. And then for the site development plan review process, again, it's formalizing kind of what we already do informally, but also looking at that plan unit development process as well. So this map here shows where the architectural design standards would be applicable. So as you can see, includes our recreation and open space, multifamily, in our 3 kind of main commercial districts, again, excluding the central corridor, and then office and service and public institutional. So there are exclusions for what would be included in the recreation and open space in that public institutional when it comes to the design. We want to make sure that was a part of this just because the Hunters Ridge Golf Course, their clubhouse, it's a part of the golf course, so it is ROS for the zoning. We want to make sure those principal structures are still being held to the design standards. But like parks, they've got maintenance buildings. So allowing those non-occupiable buildings to not have to abide by the material list and design standards that any principal structure we would hold to. This is a condensed version of that larger comparable cities list that was in the package. But what we're proposing, and then Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. As you can see, a lot of the materials up there are being used in all 3. Well, in our Cedar Rapids and Iowa City for what we're proposing. Iowa City, though, in this list does not include multifamily. So you see some gaps and wonder why they're not allowing for aluminum siding, maybe that vinyl siding. They're looking more at the commercial side of it with this list. To give kind of examples of what those materials look like kind of out in the field. The top one is the Boulevard Apartments. So that tan kind of on the base and then around the main entrance. In this area, that is architectural concrete panels. The rest of it is all fiber cement board in 2 different designs. So standard lap siding or board and batten. So both in that white and in that blue gray tone. And then the bottom is the Green Park Apartments, and they're using veneer stone in the tan, and then it's an engineered wood in their green. So these are all materials that would be permitted. Some of them we list as primary, some of them we list as secondary. Then for some commercial examples, the library here, full depth brick versus how Green Park Apartments used more of a veneer. We've kept the materials general, so it could be more of that veneer, or it could also be full depth. That would be up to the applicant. But they also here at the library have the architectural metal panels. And then the Town Place Suites by Marriott, that is EFIS. And then Hy-Vee Fast and Fresh on the bottom is using brick and then architectural concrete panels. So a lot of the materials, there's a lot of variety within them for how they can look. They could all have a wood tone or wood grain applied to them, just different material base. So because planning and zoning had such concerns over the material list, we wanted to make sure, and we kind of tweaked this footnote a few times, but with this footnote, it does allow for any material not listed as primary or secondary for the applicant to come forward. Say it's a part of the design of the building, it adds value because of X, Y, and Z. They've got a method of kind of moving that forward and not being told right away it's not permitted. So it allows the commission kind of to review that and how it's being utilized. If they're saying, yeah, it's an appropriate use of that material, it makes sense with your design. So again, we're trying not to inhibit those design professionals in what they do. So moving to the site development plan review part. Basically the same map as before, but now we've included the manufacturing districts in purple. Excuse me. So again, formalizing our informal process. As part of the site development plan review process, within the proposed code, we've included those lighting standards that we don't have. We've also included pedestrian sidewalk standards. Right now, when we review a commercial site plan, we recommend, we suggest, hey, we would like to see that sidewalk from the public sidewalk to your front door. It's not technically laid out there as something they have to do. This would make that a requirement. This also with the site development plan review, we're looking at what we already do. Landscaping standards, their own section within our zoning regulations. Same with parking standards. We also look at with other departments, we've got water, engineering, fire, building, looking at this stuff too. So it's where's the driveway accesses kind of planned for? Do they make sense? Is it a conflict with what's across the street? Or are they in line? So that is stuff that will continue to be looked at. It's just not a part of the draft ordinance because it's elsewhere in the city code. So this is kind of showing the review criteria. Again, what's being proposed is that this process would end with the Planning and Zoning Commission. The review criteria is very subjective. Design itself is very subjective item. We felt that by having the process end with the Planning and Zoning Commission, we would use council as that appeal process. Again, being subjective, we want the applicants to have that ability to appeal to someone. Figured council was that avenue. Looking at comparable cities, design standards, if they go to the council, it's for the appeal process. Otherwise, they're either ending with staff or ending with the Planning and Zoning Commission and then appealing to either a board of adjustment or city council. And then this map kind of brings together the architectural design standards, including the manufacturing, which would follow the site development plan review process, but it now includes areas where we've got existing design standards. So number one on the map, that's our central quarter zoning districts. Those design standards in that review process that does end with city council isn't going anywhere. 2, 3, and 4 are all planned unit developments. But they're not just a planned unit development, they've got very specific guideline manuals associated with them. So number 2 is the neighborhood at Indian Creek. 3 is East Town Crossing, and that's governed by the 13 and 151 development design guidelines. And number 4 is Marion Enterprise Center. So those design standards in those review processes, not going anywhere with this code. This is just in addition to what we currently have. This just kind of zooms in on Highway 13 and Highway 151. The red colors are the commercial areas, and then again, in the orange, they're governed by their specific design standards. So showing that definitely, especially on this east end, we'll have those design standards along the properties up against our major thoroughfares when people are entering our city. And then when we move into the manufacturing districts that are set off those main thoroughfares to the south, that they're still getting that site development plan review. We're still making sure that not just staff, but that second level of eyes at the Planning and Zoning Commission are making sure that we're thinking of things that maybe staff didn't think of. But again, still reviewing landscaping, parking, driveway access, everything that we currently do today. Questions?
First of all, I do continue to support having the design standards. And also, I like some of the aspects you put in there that's going to allow the architects to still have some flexibility. So I think that is, both of those are very important. But out of curiosity, you showed some examples of buildings that meet the design standards. Is there a building that's gone up recently or in the past several years that your group might be aware of that is out there that would not meet these current design standards?
There's some probably along Highway 13 that look more like something you may find in a manufacturing district.
Okay.
Town Place Suites technically is all EFS that we would have listed as secondary entry material. Again, it's a part of their design. That's something that the commission would say, yep, that's fine. You can use it fully as that primary. So even though it's up here on the slide, it's a material that's permitted, but as a secondary or trim. So there are examples even within the material kind of showcase that don't fully meet the 75% for primary material of commercial buildings. The two multifamily, at the time when we were proposing the design standards, they both would have met it. In the current way it's written, Boulevard Apartments, we have the fiber cement board as secondary and trim. But when that was going through the process, we were looking at it as it would have met what we were proposing at the time.
I think we've done overall, if I think about recently, a pretty good job. The design standards on the buildings going east-west. But there's a few gaps out there, like you talk about, a few buildings along Highway 13 that probably wouldn't have not met the design standards that we would have preferred. So I'm glad to see that we will tighten that up.
The projects on the screen, the commercial ones, and even the two multifamily ones, these were all in the central corridor, so they were all governed by other design standards. Or Boulevard, and I believe Green Park Apartments were planned unit developments. So they did have that kind of extra review process, whereas other ones along Highway 13 don't necessarily have today.
I'm gonna take this way up to the top level view. And I'm looking at comparisons, and I just want to go back kind of on the intent. And I've probably been involved in this discussion way past before even city council, because I was involved in it with Blue Zones Project, and we talked about design standards and health of a community, and healthy communities throughout the country that have them. That's part of what they look at, just like Complete Streets and a lot of the other initiatives that we took a lot of time to adapt. So when I look at this, I say, first, I appreciate the fact that it's in front of us and all the work that's going into it. It's not easy. But I also go like, are we doing what I'm looking and comparing to what we've compared to in communities. And I'm thinking, is that what we're comparing to? Is that what, I mean, are we, and if we compare that to them, are we harder to, is it better? Or are we meeting what they're doing? So I guess that's my question is, if I look at the comparables, are we like, yep, we're doing what Iowa City's doing, maybe a little better, but we're kind of right there. Or, oh, we're in line with Cedar Rapids. But I look at it and I say, we're back to reach higher. I mean, are we setting a tone that's going to set the stage for the future? Are we protecting the value of the people who have invested correctly in our community, even without design standards, to protect their property and investment by making this a community that people want to come to? And I can't tell, and I'm reading through this, and I've been bouncing back and forth in the information that was provided to us, you know, and like I looked and there was something on street trees, and now maybe there's not street trees, and I'm like, wait, I thought we just put in street trees. So, but I have to, it was probably just a sentence that caught my eye. But I think we're going into the details and we're looking at this, but I'm coming back to say, as this is presented to us, are we just meeting everybody else, or are we saying, no, we're going to be better? And we are going to require from that. And it's hard for a non-expert in this to answer that question as I look through this. So maybe, okay.
Depends on the comparable cities. Some of them were definitely going way above and beyond. Other ones, we are pretty well in line. Looking at a little cheat sheet, I believe was provided. And I question providing it because it is a little convoluted in understanding. Again, multifamily, we're proposing 50% per side for primary material and 75% per side for commercial office, public institutional buildings. Some of them are only doing kind of a 60% or maybe 50% for the entire building. So like Altoona, it's 50% for multifamily for the entire building, whereas we're looking at each side of the building. For them, for Altoona, for commercial, it's 60% of the entire building for their primary materials. Again, we're doing it per site. So in that aspect, we are kind of reaching higher. With Iowa City, it's 75%, but again, if you're looking at the building, we're looking per side. Cedar Rapids, though, is 80% per side for commercial office buildings. With their multifamily, it gets a little confusing on the length of the property or the length of the building and kind of what's permitted, but we are kind of reaching above other communities, and some were falling pretty well in line, but even with that per site versus per building, say we are overall reaching higher than most of our comparables.
Okay, so that's in Iowa. If we think about the best, you all have experts and colleagues throughout the country that you interact with. They're the ones that are speaking at your events, and they're the ones who are giving presentations on best practices and all the great things they're doing. If you ever align with those communities that are like our like size, and this isn't something you have to answer right now, I'm just kind of tossing this out as we go deep in a lot of information. Are we the people who can stand up at a conference of our peers and say, look at what we're doing. We're really proud of this. I mean, we are really setting a standard. And if we're not, are those that have been working on this diligently, are they afraid? Are they afraid that if we push this too hard, people aren't going to come here? Or what's the resistance to pushing it a little farther? Another question doesn't have to be answered right now. And then, because I think about and I'm not just on Walmart, okay, but it seems to be the example that gets used in this community. And I appreciate all that they do in our community, but people will say, I've been to communities that have a lot nicer Walmart than we have. Like, why don't we get the nice Walmart? And I remember meeting with Tom back on this years ago, and he said, it's because we don't have design standards. It's because they come in and say, what's required of us? We do the minimum of what's required of us in a community to build that facility. And then that's what you get. And if you don't have it, we don't get it, because they're not going to do it voluntarily. So as we look at the different options for that, is what we're presenting, because I mean, the library, I appreciate the example, but that's ours. That's a city one. Parks, I appreciate what we're doing, but that's a city piece. We're looking at private development coming in, and what are we hiring them people to put in our community to protect those? So I guess I'll leave it up to the questions. I see Ryan over here ready to answer some things. I'll turn it over. Doesn't all have to be answered now, but that's kind of where my brain goes on this.
Thanks, Sarah.
So it's a loaded question. And there's a lot to it.
Right.
So for starters, we have design standards that we're presenting. So from that standpoint, we're far better off than a lot of communities, especially in the state of Iowa. Because design standards are not always something that is commonly found in development codes. So kudos to the community for having in the corridor and the MEC, and now more citywide. So there's that. Nicole talked about, in other communities, more of our peers that we're reaching higher than many of them, and then we're also falling in line in some areas. We've got to be careful. I don't want to say be careful, but it is going to be a balancing act, because I think Councilman Brand, I don't want to put you on the spot, but when we were talking about this back in February, I think it was, when we presented some of these materials, the feedback that we got was, well, we have to also be cognizant of what it's going to do to the end cost. So for the person purchasing or renting, and what does that cost and how do we balance that out? There are communities, and I spend most of my career in communities that were on the far extreme of design standards. So much so that you couldn't even see a house from the street. So it's just that ultimately, and I don't want to upward delegate, but that becomes a question for the council of how far and how much do you want to push? Because if we do, there is a cost associated with it. And if there's a cost, then we might lose some of that growth that we have. So it is something that we get when we get something in place, as we start to see more developments, that's where we can have that, we can kind of fine tune it. I can tell you that in talking with some of my peers across the country, because of the downturn in the economy, a lot of them have relaxed some of their design standards, signage especially, to allow it, make it easier for the businesses to come in, and they're willing to sacrifice that appearance for the sake of some of the economic development, realizing that they could catch it on as part of redevelopment or elsewhere. So it's not an easy apples to apples comparison as we go through this. Having these design standards in place are certainly something that's going to protect the community. It's going to allow staff to push back on the developers as they're coming in. But as we get ready for the consideration of this, if there's materials that you like, as we showed those pictures, if there's things that you didn't see, or if you'd like some examples that we can give to you so we can better take your temperature of how do you feel we're doing with that reach higher, and try to meet the vision that you all are elected to help us implement.
And I appreciate that. This is actually microphone or recording, but I appreciate that. And we want to make sure that you all have the tools when you're working with developers, that it doesn't become this, put you in a tough spot with you're not able to answer things or work with them. So totally agree with that. But I also say, do we want a developer that wants to make cheap materials in our town because they need to make a buck? I mean, that's kind of the line that I don't know where that line is. I mean, is that the type of business we want in the community, is how cheap can I build this and in some cases, and then get out, and then we have that building. Not everybody has that intent, but again, we're investing in this for the long haul. So are a lot of people. And so I guess it is that line. And that's why I appreciate the research and the guidance and the overview, and asking these questions is how I guess I have to process where this goes. And I guess anybody who's looking at what are we doing, what does this mean, who's, not here listening or hearing. That's
Have you had any input from developers, builders?
Yeah, at the Home Builders Association meeting, it was presented to them. The questions that were asked, at that point, we had listed out asphalt roof and wall material. We took away the term roof because we would allow for asphalt shingles, especially multifamily, depending on what they look like and what they're going for. But then because we didn't have it as a permitted material, the commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, wanted that entire column removed. So that way, again, if someone was wanting to utilize the material that wasn't listed, they'd have a more clear way and method of kind of going for that. Can tell you that it's probably gonna be hard for an asphalt wall material, especially if it looks like a shingle, to get approved, based off of the design of a building.
Well, thank you for working on this. Everyone who's played a part in this. I think it's long overdue. You know, we've needed these standards for a long time. So it's great to see us getting there. I don't think that, at least what I've seen, that this is so extreme that it's going to keep people from wanting to develop in Marion. I think, and I've said this over and over again, not all growth is good growth. You know, I don't think we should be going after every single builder and building that somebody wants to put up. I think as we've been reaching higher and talking the talk these past few years, we have gotten what's good enough from some people. I don't think we should ever settle for good enough, because good enough never is. That's just how I feel about it. Not all growth is good growth. If we grow, it should be in a manner that adds value to the community, something that is an asset to the community. And every developer I meet with, I met with one yesterday morning who wants to put up basically tiny houses. And I said, everything's possible if it's done the right way. But, you know, we have to look at what it looks like, what it is, how's the mix of development around it, is it part of a bigger development? Is it, 100 acres of these really tiny houses? But at the end of the day, we want you to do well, but we want you to care about the community. And we want you to not give us just what's good enough. He said, I get it. If people understand that and they will give you what the minimum that you ask for. And so if we raise our standards, I don't think we're being very extreme here. If we raise our standards a little bit and require, breaker of materials, different materials, a certain percentage, that's great. And landscaping standards also are very important, because we drive up Highway 13 and there's not a tree in sight in some of those new buildings. In front of some of those new buildings, not a bush, nothing planted. So can't look backwards, but we can look forward and learn from that, and ask people for better, ask them for their best, and have the standards to be able to, if they're not willing to do that on their own, to, if they want to build something here, that they have to give the community something that elevates the community and moves us forward and adds value. But thank you for your work on it. I'm really happy to see this moving forward. Anyone else?
I just following off on Councilwoman Mentzer's comments, one of the things that we've started to implement here is a periodic review of ordinances. And is that something that, as council considers the design standard ordinance, is that something that we should schedule as a review? Hey, how many developments did we have that went through that fell under this, and kind of do a review like we would with the UTVs? Is that something that would help? That way we can kind of gauge some of these and be a little bit more, it helps us to be, I think, a little bit more proactive. So I offered that as a suggestion as you're contemplating that the ordinance.
Oh, great, sorry.
Yep. Well, Ryan, just in response to that, I think for something like this where there's been an improvement to the basis of the ordinance, it's set some unified expectations that can be communicated. I sense there's been some process alignment. So you've set the stage to perform differently going forward in all regards. I think in this state, I think it's probably worthwhile to have a check as to, how's our performance on this? How is it working? And are there some gaps that need to be filled in? In short, I think ordinances that have great impact like this should be subject to some continuous review for continuous improvement.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks, Nicole. Rachel.
At a recent council meeting, it was determined that the work session agenda should be reformatted so that the primary focus is on presentations and other discussions. A review of the Thursday agenda would still occur, and it's at the end of the meeting. A draft work session or a draft agenda was included in the packet and is shown on the screen. We first want to get your thoughts on the reformat. If you would like to move forward with that. Sorry.
Any thoughts on that? Anyone object to that? Anyone have any strong feelings in opposition to that?
Try it.
Let's try it.
Try it.
Plan would be to start that change in January.
Okay.
And then for the upcoming agenda review section, the Thursday agenda would be linked and would include all agenda memos and attachments as normal. So we also wanted to get your feedback on the agenda memos as they are now, the number of attachments that are provided. Is there enough information included? Is there a desire for more?
Kind of our customer service survey, if you will.
Any comments on the agenda memos, the attachments and information provided?
Well, if you want to comment, I'll give you one. Generally, I think it's the amount of information we've been receiving, I think, is appropriate. Especially seeing as how a lot of times, that information's already been pulled together. For example, if we're reviewing something that came from P and Z, all that information has already been pulled together for their presentations. It's very easy to pass that on. But sometimes we talk about an issue that may refer back to other city council meetings. And I think I generally don't feel we need all that real historical information. Maybe a reference like you've been doing is appropriate. I think you make reference to other city council meetings and things like that. I think the balance we've been doing is appropriate. So I've never found a time very often where I look for more information. So I like the balance.
I think sometimes the reference to past meetings is because sometimes we forget and we say, well, I don't remember talking about that. And so the staff is anticipating and giving us the history of how we got to where we are. So I definitely appreciate that because sometimes I do forget that, or if I miss a meeting, we all miss a meeting at some point. So we may miss a discussion and then we come to a meeting and it's brought up and we say, well, we never discussed this. Well, it was, but we just weren't here. So I think that's valuable. And I appreciate, I notice over time, these memos and the information in them has been improved based on how we're treating it and how we're receiving it and what we're asking for. And so I think it's well done and they're well put together, my personal view. Anyone else? Okay, thanks, Rachel. Okay, Ryan Miller.
So this is a high-level update on some of the treatment agreements we have with Cedar Rapids over the past year. So we've been working on a series of 3 agreements. This includes an operation maintenance agreement. Sorry. All right, I'll start over. And so, yeah.
I'm following you.
Yeah. Good now. And so we have a series of agreements we've been working on over the past year. This includes an operation maintenance agreement, a revised one, a long-term capacity agreement, and then an agreement for plant improvement. So this is very high level. This is to prepare you what's coming down the line here, probably the next series of meetings and then next spring. And so currently our operation and maintenance agreement is flow-based. So if you remember, the people on council, back in 2019, we passed a new agreement that is flow-based. Well, and how we see it, it doesn't work. So this last year, we had some issues with some flow meters that we had to do some rate corrections with. We got that accomplished in the tune of $1.2 million. And so what the staff is preparing to do, and what we have done, is go back and prepare a draft agreement for a population-based agreement. And so how we see it moving forward is that a population-based agreement in proportion to the metro area is going to be much better for the city of Marion. This is going to allow us to prepare rate calculations, as well as not allow those errors to occur that occurred this year with the flow meters. And so that's something that we have done. We prepared a draft agreement for Cedar Rapids. We have given that to them, and that's the direction we intend to go through. And so that's basically what we're going to do with that agreement. So is there any questions on that part? Questions?
And there was something satisfying about the flow-based agreement because you had a measurement base that you could go back to and look at. So my question is, from a technical standpoint, do we have enough information to go to a population-based system? And how do we verify over time that that is, in fact, working fairly for all parties involved? And the footnote to that question is, shouldn't we then still also maintain reliable flow metering? I'll leave it at that.
Yep, perfect question. So the way we're going to get to this is that when we go to a population-based agreement, it simplifies the whole process. All right. And so when we go to a flow agreement, it complicates the whole process. And so when we go to a flow agreement, and what the extreme of that is that we have to take samplings of the loadings. And so it's not just what the flow is, it's also what the strength of the loadings is. So it becomes very complex over time. And so yeah, exactly. And so with Kim coming from Hiawatha, the flow-based agreement is a very complex process. It doesn't allow us to budget. It doesn't allow us to do rate calculations the way we should. And so the way we're putting this new agreement together is that it will be based on a proportionate based on population. And so that's how we've prepared this. Go ahead.
And different from.
So.
And different from the fact that if one community, because it's a metro agreement, if one community invests in their sewer lines and another one doesn't, then that percentage changes. So if Marion improves in our current agreement, if Marion improves and Cedar Rapids doesn't, there's some advantages for us. But then if Cedar Rapids improves, then we're picking up that additional flow because of infiltration. So it gets, I mean, and that's just a little piece of the current agreement. It gets very confusing. And that's where when you go population-based, it's so much easier to understand and so much easier to explain to our residents and our business community as to how we calculate our fees.
On a high level basis, didn't we historically used to be population based, then we switched to flow, and now we're going to go back to population. I want to make sure I'm understanding those changes because I remember the discussions about flow based being it was actually going to result in a cost savings for the community because we're going to educate all of our citizens to become more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. So is that all out the window with the flow based scenario?
Right, explain that. So you're absolutely right. So our flows are not, since we're a residential community, our flows do not reflect what we should as a population. And so our flows are actually much less than what we are per population because we're residential, not commercial. And so what we've seen in the past couple of years has been some the data that has been collected between Cedar Rapids and Marion has not been consistent. This last year, the data we collected has been consistent. We did a rate calculation and they had to do a rate adjustment for us in the tune of $1.2 million. And so what we're looking at doing going forward is do a population-based agreement that therefore we can calculate those rates as we move forward. If that answers your question.
Okay, so if it's going to be based on population, we already know that Marion has a lot more, much higher percentage of residential usage than Cedar Rapids. They've got a lot more manufacturing. So how does that imbalance or difference in balance affect the rates of a household in Cedar Rapids compared to a household in Marion? Are those two households going to have similar rates because they've got a lot more manufacturing and higher usage flow?
Absolutely. So anytime we talk about rates with the city of Cedar Rapids, the industrial flow has to be separated from the residential flow. Okay. And so this gets to the point where Kim was talking about, it's very complicated. And so we are dealing with an industrial strength treatment plant.
Right.
And so we have to separate the industrial flows. We do that every year.
Okay.
No matter if it's population based or industrial.
Okay.
Flow based. We have to do that every year. And then we have to calculate that. The issue we're running into is that this last year and the years preceding this, we did not agree on our flows. And so this year we proved that. And so going to a population-based agreement will allow us to stick to a flat flow agreement, not based necessarily on flow, but on our population. This will allow us to project out many years to come.
Okay, so going forward, then Cedar Rapids, Marion, and Hiawatha then are all going to be population based. So there's some commonality
That's
methodologies going forward.
what we're proposing.
Okay.
So the city of Cedar Rapids, their staff has said they want to simplify these agreements. If you look across the board in the metro area, every single agreement is different. And so what we're trying to do is to standardize these agreements based on population.
In moving to a population-based rate structure, then, do we diminish any incentive for our infiltration prevention activities, slip lining, manhole? I mean, that all still seems to be material.
Yeah.
And how is that quantified then within the rate structure?
And so in a population-based agreement, what you'll still see is a surcharge, all right? And so we currently pay a surcharge event. And so if in the event our flows exceed the surcharge, that alludes to the fact that we're not doing enough I&I or infiltration control. So we have always been very aggressive on that, slip lining, things like that. Mike and his team has always been great at that. And so we're going to continue to do that. However, the surcharge will be there as a penalty. However, we don't think we'll ever get past that surcharge event. If that answers your question.
Just one last follow on. So that surcharge would be invoked upon what measurement?
We're still
Low?
We're still in conversation. It is
Okay.
low.
Okay.
You are correct. And so if we got to the point, so typically when you're in a flow-based scenario, they calculate a population about 150 gallons per day, right? And so if you start surcharging above that maximum, that's considered a surcharge event. Okay.
So we're still going to have flow meters, but for a different purpose.
We will always have.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
So I'm a little confused because you seem to contradict yourself on what you said earlier, that if we're community, because we're mostly residential, our usage is a lot lower. But then we're going back to population base, which is gonna it's something, the way I hear it is that if we stayed at flow, we would have a lower rate because
The issue,
used a lot less.
the issue we're dealing with is in a flow-based agreement, we're gonna have data errors. And so that's what we've had this last year. There's gonna be a cost. Looked at flow meters that we're not calculating our flow rates correctly. And so what has happened, we had to do a rate adjustment.
Right,
And so what we're proposing to do is go back to a population-based.
right. But it sounds like if we stayed with the flow rate, we would have a lower.
Not necessarily. So the current flow rate that we were at is based on our population.
Okay. So what will this, going back to a population rate, have, how will that affect the actual rate that's going to be charged to the residents?
And so going back to population rate, it will keep it consistent. It will lower it.
It will lower it?
Yes. And so before, when we went back to a flow rate, we were relying on the meters provided, the flow meters provided by the city of Cedar Rapids. What we did is provided flow meters of our own behind them to validate that information. And so with that, what we're getting at, it's going to be a better situation if we go back to a population-based agreement. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so one thing I will point out, when we go to flow metering and sample, it's very labor intensive.
Sure.
And so that's one thing we do want to avoid.
Those were important questions because I remember one of the things that we really considered when we made this change was how it would impact the residents. And we sold it to the residents saying to them, listen, you're only going to have to pay for what you use. So now we're switching back and I hear what you're saying.
Yep.
But I think we've got some work to do
Absolutely.
in order for our residents to fully understand why we're kind of going back and forth. So I just think we should consider that as you make this change. I hear you and I understand what you're saying. I do think we've got a little bit of a public relations concern here that we're going to have to work through with our residents.
And so what we put together is a proposal for new agreement. Cedar Rapids has come back and said this agreement won't come into effect until 2027. However, the staff's opinion is that we would like to see this implemented sooner. And so you're absolutely right. There's an education campaign that we have to do. And so, but it's going to be a few years before we get this implemented. But this is, we prepared the draft agreement, given that to Cedar Rapids for review. And what we're trying to do is make it consistent among the metro communities. So. Okay, so I'll move on. And this is the long-term capacity agreement that we've been working on this past year. This is actually a stipulation in our current operations maintenance agreement, is that we need to commit to this by, originally we had to commit to this by July. We did an amendment to this agreement. We passed it, the city council did. And then we had to agree to this by December of this year. And so under the terms of this agreement, Marion is requesting a treatment capacity of a population of 61,000 over the next 20 years. And so the estimated cost currently that Cedar Rapids provided us is $15 million. All right. And so that would be amortized over the next 20 years, starting in 2027. All right. So that's capacity purchase starting at that date. All right. And so what has happened is that Cedar Rapids has said, hey, we want an extension. We want to review these numbers a little bit more. And so they've extended this by 3 months. And so this agreement will come back to the city council, probably, I'm guessing February, March of next year. That we'll see this agreement from the city council. Questions? No?
Don't see any.
Nothing. All right. And so the agreement for plant improvements. So this is very, very preliminary, right? We wanted to get this in front of the city council because the information is not, wouldn't say it's very consolidated at this point. So Cedar Rapids is proposing plant improvements at about $380 million. Okay. Marion's share is kind of, I don't want to say this, but it is kind of a moving target right now. And so it is between 55 to 80 million dollars. And though this would begin in 2027 and would be amortized over a 20 to 30 year period. This would begin in 2027. So this is very high level, very preliminary. We wanted to get this on your radar. We have a lot of meetings to have with Cedar Rapids to get this number pinned down. But this is by the city of Cedar Rapids. So these improvements are essentially what they've been proposing to do over the next few years. This includes the nitrate reductions that we've talked about. This includes all the plan improvements that we've previously discussed. And so once we visit with Cedar Rapids, we should have a refined number to share with the city council.
Are there federal funds available to help with those?
Absolutely.
How does that affect this?
It depends on what funds the city of Cedar Rapids applies for. I do know they are applying for state revolving funds. And so right now, this is very high level. I can tell you they do not have a completed plan for improvements. All this is a discussion at this point.
But this is without any government, like federal.
This
assistance.
is without any other assistance.
So,
Correct.
okay.
But yes, but we did want.
My stretching exercises for the day. So you mentioned an important improvement that's in the scope of work, which is nitrate reduction. And so I would imagine there is a category of environmental system enhancements that are included in this. I'm sure there is just some generic equipment replacement because old equipment just needs to be replaced. And now I'm back to my most favorite topic. As we move, independent of our tariff structure, as we move closer to being a community of 61,000, 60,000, and all communities do that, there's going to be a flow-based design driver that's going to factor into this improvement scope. And I guess I think in this process, it would really be important to understand. And let's just say that the impact over 20 to 30 years to Marion is 60 million. I'm just picking a number. What percentage of that number is just hardware replacement? What percentage of the number is environmental compliance, things that we responsibly ought to do? And some of them may be federally required, et cetera. But then what percentage of that $60 million is also because of anticipated flow increases? So even though we aren't necessarily perhaps thinking of this from a tariff perspective, I think it's still, those are the components, and I may be missing a couple, that factor into telling the story why that $60 million over 20 or 30 years is going to be necessary.
Yeah, great question. And so staff's intent is to have the city of Cedar Rapids staff to be present here to address the council on those issues. They can explain it better than we can. That was our intent with this meeting, is that they would be here to address it. We can address that. And again, we don't have that information, but we're hoping here in the next few weeks we will. And so what we're trying to do is prepare you. And then I think probably next year, in the beginning of the year, we'll probably have Cedar Rapids staff here to address the city council, to address that. So Our goal here was to prepare you with what we're looking at, with the numbers they've offered us. And then from that point, we'll continue to work with them, continue to work with HR Green to provide you more accurate data. So
55 to 80 million. More or less? Our own plans. You knew I was going to ask that.
More.
A lot more.
It's gonna be, yeah, we, HR Green did kind of a estimate for us. And I think, what were we talking about? It was gonna be north of 130 million.
We're looking at, if Marion wanted to build a plant, between 150 to 200 million. Yeah. And so that's the numbers that came from HR Green, and we plan to have them here as well. They can provide that information, but essentially we're preparing you right now for these discussions.
I think that's the biggest thing about the presentation here is that, you know, when we started when I started, we were approached by Cedar Rapids saying, hey, we've got this sewer agreement that says you have to tell us your planned growth for the next 20 years. So we brought in HR Green, we brought in Cedar Rapids, we partnered with Hiawatha, sit down and have those discussions. We were doing that audit of the flow-based system. That's where we discovered discrepancies. And we continue to work with them on clearing up the discrepancies to get an accurate picture so that we can then sit there and go internally with our team, which we did. We talked to community development. We looked at trend data. We looked at our comp plan, where our growth areas were, and we applied some factors. We took it to the council subcommittee to say, hey, what do you think our value is? So we had a contractual obligation to respond back to the city of Cedar Rapids. This is what we think our capacity that we're going to need to buy into your system is going to be in the next 20 years. So that's that 61,000. As part of that process, the reason that first agreement came up, talking through what are some of the challenges, what are some of the issues that we've experienced with this. Actually, it was we the city of Marion presented to Cedar Rapids. Well, you've got one with Hiawatha, you got one with Robbins, you got one with with Marion, and you got yours. Why don't we make those consistent? It makes it easier for us, because I think Hiawatha's and Marion's were similar, Robbins was dissimilar. And actually, when you looked at the proportionate share, I think they're population based, and proportionately, they were getting a better deal. So as we were going through the maintenance agreement, the one that exists today, we started talking through, well, how do we reconcile? You know, there was no trend, there was no averaging or three-year average to eliminate some of the spikes that we were seeing as we were evaluating the data. So there was that operation maintenance cost. Then with the capacity, our population expectation over the next 20 years, that helps Cedar Rapids complete these two projects, the lift station as well as this, as they're planning for those upgrades. The nutrient reduction strategy, that's actually something that's being rolled out by the state, by the EPA, and that's all large facilities throughout the state are going to have to deal with it. It's a very costly endeavor. I dealt with it when I was in Illinois, and I just came from a community where we were building a state-of-the-art plant to meet those standards. So it is a very costly thing. Their plan is massive and it's very costly, so it's taking time, and we've been pushing them in a very professional and collaborative way to let's get us the data so we can make sure we're running those models with Mike Maloney to better try to predict what is that cost impact going to be, and we can try to plan ahead and then start that public education component of, hey, we've got the sewer, this is what it's cost, this is what we need to do in order to make sure our system is self-sustaining, but we're also meeting any sort of reserve covenants that we need to have in place, which is something we don't necessarily have now. So, so we wanted to make sure we brought these to you, because complex things, multiple complex things with the 3 different agreements, and just start having that conversation and making sure that you're prepped. We do, as Ryan mentioned, working with Cedar Rapids, we had to extend the deadline by which we would get them the capacity. They've now approached us and said, hey, look, we need a little bit more time And so they're going to be extending that. They're going to be requesting an extension so we can continue to work and get better numbers. Again, right, what Ryan said is these are estimates as we have today. These could change, they could go up, could go down. Hopefully they go down as they continue to engineer this project. But it's a massive project, and these do take quite a bit of years to undertake. But I think what the lift station agreement was, what, 2034?
Yeah, so there's a couple plant improvements that they're planning. And so there's what they call lift station. That's a separate part of the plant. And then they have the main plant agreements. And so those are phased very differently. And so in with that, it's very complex. So we want to keep it high level.
But my point in asking that, Ryan, if we can go back a slide. I mean, 2027, go back a slide, please. I thought we had one that showed 2034, but the point is, we're talking several years out. And so we're wanting to have those conversations starting now so we can continue and not just dump it on the council at once.
So when we talk about these numbers and how this cost gets allocated, I'm assuming it's not just population based. I'm assuming there's also weightings in there. For example, we already saw, we know we have a lot more residential. Cedar Rapids has a lot more manufacturing. So if it's going to be weighted on both of those factors, that means Cedar Rapids is going to have to do some very difficult projections on the manufacturing side and weight that into their side of it as well.
That's a great question. And so yes and no. Right now, the way our O&M agreement works, our operation agreement works, is that no city in the metro area pays for any industrial treatment. And so the city of Cedar Rapids, the water pollution control facility, they separate out all costs for industrial treatment. Okay. And so by doing that, they have a cost allocated for just residential treatment. That includes Cedar Rapids, Hiawatha, Palo, Marion, Robbins.
Okay.
All right. And so when they come to us with these numbers, it's very, very important that we validate those numbers. That's why we hired HR Green. That's why they're here helping us. And they've been a huge benefit to us.
Keep it up.
Yes. And so that's our goal, is to validate the numbers. So perfect point. We will validate those numbers based on residential projections.
Is that the end of your presentation?
No, that's it, unless there's any other questions.
Any further questions?
No.
Curiosity, a few years ago when we talked about doing some green methods of reducing flow and I don't know, was it like switchgrass fields or whatnot? I don't remember what it was.
Yep.
Is that still something that's possible to help reduce some of the?
It is, yeah, it is, but I think it would be better. So that's why we brought on a consultant for this. And so once we have Cedar Rapids to narrow down these numbers, their budget numbers, that's where HR will come in. Hey, look, here's what we can do. Here's what we can validate.
Sure.
And this is the information we can give back to you. And so we have that on our list of things to do.
Okay, good.
Yep. Good.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
This is a closed session. So once we as soon as we approve the closed session, move to City Hall for the closed session, but this will remain open.
We will head over to City Hall and we will be adjourning from there. Council will not be asked to take any action. So once we adjourn into closed session, we'll be disassembling this and be concluding over at City Hall.
Okay, perfect.
Speaking of the mic. I make a motion to adjourn to closed session regarding litigation, real estate transaction, and personnel matters as permitted under section 21.51C 21.5(1)(I) of the code of Iowa, 6 separate matters.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded to adjourn to closed session. We have the statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have reviewed the proposed subject matter for the closed session and find there to be 3 matters appropriate for a closed session under 21.51C, 2 under section 21.51I, and 1 under section 21.51J.
Questions in this session before we vote? Roll call, please.
Mr. Harper,
Yes.
Mr. Jensen.
Yes.
Ms. Atkins. Yes. Mayor Alabasli. Mr. Brandt.
Yes.
Ms. Menzer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Thanks everyone for all your great work. And we're adjourned to closed session.
Well, I know I'm.